Once again, New York leads. New York leads. When Republicans in Washington attack abortion rights, we protect them. When Republicans in Washington refuse sensible gun safety legislation, we enact it. And when Republicans in Washington and state legislatures deny the right to vote and undermine our democracy, we do something here in New York. We pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I'm so glad to be back at this college, especially as we celebrate Juneteenth, as we know the history. We know the history. I marched in what is claimed to be the largest Juneteenth parade in America after Texas. That would be in Buffalo, believe it or not. Got to do a little catching up here in Brooklyn. We got to do a little more, but Buffalo is the largest. We marched there. I was with Letitia James and many others who came together to acknowledge that that is a community still in great pain. After the Buffalo shooting, people wore T-shirts that were stamp out white supremacy. It's a shame that we have to do that in this era, but I was so proud to march with them. But we talked about what this day meant. And in their honor, I wear this because it says choose life, and it's got a little buffalo on it. Some of the family members who lost loved ones want me to wear this. But on this day, it was supposed to be a day of liberation for enslaved people 157 years ago. Supposed to be. Because since that time, the journey has been long, it's been hard. As I mentioned, blood has been spilled along the way. But we never give up. We never give up because we stand on the shoulders of those who marched before us. And today, we're going to make a significant step to honor those individuals. And we think about Medgar as he was trying to vote in 1946 when a gang of white men surrounded him at the courthouse. They stopped him from casting his vote. That had to be so dehumanizing for that young man who just wanted to do what he thought was his inalienable right as an American citizen. And he had to be prevented from that. But he would not be deterred. For 2 more decades, he fought on. He spent long days and nights trying to fight for a more equal, a more just, more righteous America, fighting against racism, segregation. But ultimately, he was killed by a white supremacist, 1963. So that hate that we're experiencing now was prevalent then and for centuries before that. So we continue that fight, and we won't stop here. This is New York State. And I'm going to give you a little more history, too, because I'm very proud when I see Hazel Dukes that the genesis of the NAACP was in our state. It started up where I come from, the Niagara movement. There are monuments and tributes to people who helped create that Underground Railroad passage that came through Buffalo to give people freedom, as many of them found their way over to Canada. That's a story we honor and talk about with great frequency. But as Medgar Evers knew, there's so many fights to be had, and one of them is protecting the right to vote, because our democracy only works if everyone who's eligible can participate in it, and that the rights of the voters are respected. Something we're seeing under assault in our nation's capital every single day in the news. The shocking revelation that there are people out there who are so firm in their belief that Donald Trump should remain their president, fostered by him, that they literally attacked our Capitol for the first time since it was attacked during the War of 1812. That is going to be a mark on our state, our community, our nation for forever. People always talk about the attack. I think it was 1814. Literally horses crashed through. And then 2021. But also, there are people out there willing to undermine our elections by taking over the Capitol. There's also those who do it day after day and trying to be a little more quiet about it. In state capitals, a little more sinister, a little more under some of the boards of elections. And they are out there trying to do the same thing to strip away the right that Medgar Evers was also denied. They don't care that the laws have changed. And when we see what's happening in the Supreme Court in Washington, it's kind of a reminder sometimes the laws you have on the books just aren't enough. So then you look to your state leaders, your state legislators, and say, we are going to make the changes we need. So across the country, we're seeing stricter voter ID laws, shorter early voting periods, and more burdens when you're trying to just vote by mail. We're seeing people purged on voter rolls. We're seeing attacks play out in real time. And in Washington, they had the opportunity to do something that was significant, to name a package of reforms that say no more, named after civil rights icon John Lewis. John Lewis. I heard John Lewis speak at my daughter's college graduation at a Virginia college in 2011. He had those young people screaming his name, standing on their feet, cheering like I've never seen before. It was so inspiring as he talked about what he did when he was their age. He called this generation to serve and to fight back, and they were so enthralled with him. And literally 2 weeks later, I won an election I wasn't expected to win, and I took my seat, and I went over. After being sworn in, I went over to John Lewis. I said, "You do not know the impact you had on this group of a lot of white kids in the audience. You made them believe. You opened their eyes to something perhaps they were not aware of. They needed to hear your voice, John Lewis. And thank you for doing what you did." And he became a great friend of mine when we served together in Congress. He was powerful. And I know our delegation in Washington, Yvette Clarke and all the others, they're standing up and fighting. They're trying to get it done. They're trying so hard, and I admire that. But the assaults from the Republicans, the roadblocks seem to be never ending. But here, in our state, we are not bystanders. We are upstanders. We're going to stand up to these injustices. We'll let them know how we treat this in New York. We don't just say something, we do something, because that's what John Lewis called us to do. He fought for justice, he fought for the right to vote until the very day he died. And in a final message to our country, he wrote, "Democracy is not a state. Democracy is an act, and each generation must do its part." My friends, today we're acting. We're acting. We're demonstrating to the rest of the nation what they can be doing in state capitals when Washington refuses to act. The state legislatures, the state leaders, they have the power to stand up. And so we honor these individuals, and we are going to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York State to make sure that our election laws improve the voting process and protect our voters. We're going to fight back against voter suppression, voter dilution, intimidation, deception, and obstruction. We're providing more language assistance. If you can't understand the language that your ballot's in, how can you possibly vote? We are changing that as well. And we're going to change our election laws so we no longer hurt minority communities. We're going to say, we said we're going to get it done. We did this before. We did early voting, and I hope everybody's gotten their early vote, and it's a lot easier. I did mine on Saturday. Get your early votes in. Tell everybody. We've added polling sites to college campuses, and we've restored the right to vote. But today's legislation will not be the last. We'll always find where there's cracks, where there's not perfection, when we can look at our laws and say, let's fix them and make them even stronger. That's what the elected leadership does with the support of advocates who find these deficiencies and bring them to our attention. So, as always, when the federal government fails to act, you can count on New York to punch back and fight even harder. We will not rest. We will not rest while these injustices continue. As I said, we did it with abortion, we did it with reproductive freedom, we did it with gun legislation, and now we're doing it again with voting rights. So we honor Juneteenth, we honor Medgar, we honor John Lewis, but we're not looking backwards any longer. We'll continue to right the wrongs of the past, but let's create a future we don't have to do that any longer. So our children and their children don't have to look at our generation and say they're going to right the wrongs of our past. We have the power in our hands. The question is, will we use it? The answer is today, we are. And that's why I'm so proud to be here to sign this landmark legislation. No state in the nation, you hear this a lot, no state in the nation has stood up with the courage and the conviction and the power that we have by protecting these important rights. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you being here.